Have you ever noticed how anxiety can transform a simple situation into a giant threat inside the head? Sometimes, an unanswered message becomes a sign of rejection. A silence becomes proof that something went wrong. An ordinary commitment seems like an impossible test. And the most curious thing is that many times, nothing really happened. The body is safe, the environment is normal, the people around did not even notice anything. But inside it seems that there's an alarm ringing nonstop. Anxiety is one of the most common human experiences, but also one of the most misunderstood. Many people think that anxiety is just thinking too much, being nervous, or not being able to relax. But it is much more complex than that. It involves brain, body, memory, expectation, fear, imagination, and even habits that we repeat every day without realizing it. And perhaps the most intriguing part is this. Anxiety does not always appear to destroy you. In many cases, it is born as an exaggerated attempt to protect. The problem begins when this protection mechanism becomes too sensitive. It is as if the brain installed an extremely powerful smoke detector. It should ring only when there is fire, but it begins to go off with steam from the shower, smell of food, dust in the air, or any small change in the environment. The person knows rationally that perhaps there is no real danger, but the body reacts as if there were. The heart speeds up, breathing changes, the mind races, the muscles become tense, and suddenly the world seems smaller, heavier, and more threatening. And that is why understanding anxiety changes many things. Because when you understand what is happening, you stop seeing yourself as someone weak, broken, or dramatic. You begin to realize that there is an internal system trying to predict risks, avoid pain, and control uncertainties. Only that this system, when it goes beyond the point, begins to transform life into a sequence of alerts. So now, let us see 10 facts about anxiety that help explain why it happens, why it seems so convincing, and why, many times, fighting against it in the wrong way only makes everything stronger. The first fact is that anxiety tries to predict the future before it happens. This may be one of the most important things to understand. Anxiety does not live exactly in the present. It feeds on the what if. What if I fail? What if they judge me? What if I embarrass myself? What if I lose this opportunity? What if the person no longer likes me? What if that symptom is something serious? What if everything goes wrong? The anxious mind tries to simulate future scenarios to prepare you. In small doses, this is useful. Before a test, a meeting, a trip, or an important decision, a little anxiety can make you organize yourself better, pay attention to details, and avoid mistakes. The problem is that the anxious mind usually does not stop at the most likely scenario. It goes straight to the worst possible scenario. And the more frightening the scenario, the more urgent it seems. It is as if the brain said, I know this perhaps will not happen, but if it happens, it will be terrible. So we need to think about this now. The person begins trying to protect themselves, but ends up trapped in a sequence of negative predictions. The future stops being an open place and becomes a threat waiting to happen. The curious detail is that anxiety often disguises itself as responsibility. The person thinks, I'm just preparing myself. But in practice, they are no longer preparing themselves. They are torturing themselves with possibilities. Preparation has a beginning, middle, and end. Excessive anxiety does not end. It always finds one more doubt, one more exception, one more remote possibility. And that is why an anxious mind can feel tired even without having done anything physically. It spent hours living problems that do not even exist yet. The second fact is that the body feels anxiety even before the mind understands. Many people think that anxiety begins with thoughts, but sometimes it appears first in the body. You feel a tightness in the chest, a lump in the throat, tension in the shoulders, butterflies in the stomach, short breathing, restless hands, sweat, trembling, nausea, or a strange sensation of alert. Only afterward comes the question, why am I like this? This happens because anxiety is not only an idea, it is a bodily reaction. The nervous system interprets something as a threat and prepares the organism to act. The heart beats faster to carry blood to the muscles. Breathing changes to capture more oxygen. The senses become more attentive. The muscles prepare for movement. All of this would make sense if you were facing an immediate physical danger. The problem is that, today, many threats are psychological. A demand, a criticism, an uncertainty, an expectation, a difficult conversation, a bill, an interview, a fear of rejection. The body does not differentiate so well a real threat from an imagined threat. If the brain believes that something can go wrong, the body can react as if it were already happening. That is why someone can be sitting on the couch in a safe environment and still feel as if they were in danger. And this bodily sensation can frighten even more. The person feels the heart speeding up and thinks, "There is something wrong with me." This thought increases the fear, which increases the symptoms, which increase the fear again. This is how a cycle is created. One of the traps of anxiety is that it uses real sensations to convince you of dangers that perhaps are not real. The tightness is real. The shortness of breath seems real. The tension is real, but the interpretation may be exaggerated. The body is reacting, but this does not necessarily mean that there is a catastrophe happening. Understanding this can reduce the fear of fear itself. The third fact is that anxiety loves uncertainty, but not in the good sense. The anxious mind suffers when it cannot have guarantees. It wants to know exactly what will happen, how people will react, what the result will be, whether the choice will be perfect, whether the risk is zero, whether nothing bad will arise. Only that life does not offer this type of certainty. Life works with probabilities, changes, and surprises. That is why anxiety tries to compensate for the lack of control with excessive thinking. The person reviews old conversations, tries to interpret small signs, searches for answers on the internet, asks several people for opinions, creates plans for all scenarios, avoids decisions, or postpones important actions until feeling complete safety. But complete safety almost never comes. And the more the person tries to eliminate uncertainty, the more intolerable uncertainty seems. It is like scratching a wound. In the moment, it gives a sensation of relief, but afterward it irritates more. The anxious mind seeks guarantees to calm itself, but ends up training the brain to believe that it can only be calm when it has absolute certainty. And since absolute certainty is rare, anxiety gains more space. A simple example: you send a message and the person takes time to reply. A calm mind thinks, "They must be busy." An anxious mind begins, "Did I say something wrong? Are they avoiding me? Did they change with me? Did something happen?" The lack of response becomes a blank screen where anxiety projects its greatest fears. The silence proves nothing, but anxiety transforms the emptiness into threat. The fourth fact is that avoiding fear can make anxiety grow. This seems contradictory because avoiding what causes anxiety gives immediate relief. If a person is afraid of speaking in public and avoids a presentation, they feel relief. If they are afraid of a difficult conversation and run away from it, they feel relief. If they are afraid of leaving the house and stay at home, they feel relief. But the brain learns a dangerous message. I only stayed well because I avoided it. So, the next time, the situation seems even more threatening. Avoidance works as a reward for anxiety. It says, "See, I protected you. If you had faced it, something horrible could have happened." Only that the person never discovers whether they would be able to handle that. They never test reality. They never collect evidence that perhaps it would be bearable. And, with time, the world becomes smaller. First, the person avoids a phone call, then avoids meetings, then avoids opportunities, then avoids anything that generates discomfort. Anxiety does not decrease when we always obey it. Many times, it decreases when the brain learns, little by little, that discomfort can be felt without the person needing to run away. This does not mean throwing yourself all at once into unbearable situations. It means taking small steps with awareness to show the body that not every alarm requires escape. The most curious thing is that courage does not usually appear before the action. Many times, it appears afterward. The person does something with fear realizes that they survived, and only then the brain updates the information. It learns, "It was uncomfortable, but I managed." This phrase, repeated in real experiences, can be more powerful than 1,000 positive thoughts. The fifth fact is that anxiety transforms thoughts into apparent truths. When we are anxious, thoughts seem more reliable than they really are. An idea passes through the head and gains the weight of a prediction. I will fail. Nobody likes me. This will go wrong. I will not endure it. Something bad will happen. The person does not only think these phrases, they feel these phrases. And when a thought comes accompanied by intense emotion, it seems true. But thoughts are not proof. Thoughts are mental events. They can be useful, exaggerated, distorted, incomplete, or simply fruits of an emotional state. The anxious brain has a tendency to look for danger, so it filters reality in a selective way. It gives more attention to what confirms the fear and ignores what shows safety. If 10 people praise and one criticizes, the anxious mind can become stuck on the criticism. If a presentation had several good points and one small mistake, it fixes on the mistake. If a person responded in a neutral way, anxiety interprets it as coldness. If someone takes time to look, it interprets it as rejection. The anxious mind is not trying to be unfair. It is trying to avoid pain. But to avoid pain, it begins to see threat where perhaps there is only ambiguity. A useful question in moments like this is not, "How do I make this thought disappear?" Many times, the more we try to expel a thought, the more it insists. A better question may be, "What other explanations exist?" Or "What real proof do I have of this?" Or "Would I say this to someone I love?" These questions create space between the person and the thought. And this space is important because anxiety likes fusion. It wants you to become the thought, but you can observe the thought without obeying it immediately. The sixth fact is that anxiety may be connected to excess control. Controlling gives a sensation of safety. Planning, organizing, and predicting can be excellent qualities. But when the need for control becomes an attempt to prevent any discomfort, life begins to become rigid. The person tries to control their own image, the answers of others, the result of conversations, time, the future, performance, the body, emotions, and even the way they should feel. Only that the more the person tries to control everything, the more they realize that they cannot. And this perception increases anxiety. It is like trying to hold water with closed hands. The more strength, the more it escapes. Anxiety frequently appears when there is a large difference between what the person wants to control and what they really can control. You can control your preparation, but not everyone's opinion. You can control your honesty, but not the reaction of the other person. You can control your habits, but not all events. You can control your posture in the face of a problem, but not guarantee that nothing difficult will happen. This does not mean abandoning responsibility. On the contrary, it means separating responsibility from illusion of control. Responsibility is acting on what depends on you. Illusion of control is suffering while trying to dominate what was never completely in your hands. An anxious mind usually thinks that relaxing is dangerous, as if lowering the guard were inviting something bad to happen. But living in constant alert does not prevent life from being unpredictable. It only makes the person suffer before, during, and after each situation. Sometimes, peace begins when the person accepts that they do not need to mentally solve all possible futures to have permission to live the present. The seventh fact is that anxiety can become a mental habit. Many people think that anxiety is only a reaction to specific problems, but it can also become a repeated pattern. The brain learns paths. If a person spends years responding to life with worry, negative anticipation, and tension, this path becomes more automatic. Not because the person chose to suffer, but because the brain got used to circulating there. It is like a trail in the woods. The more you pass through it, the more open it becomes. After some time, the brain goes through that path almost by itself. The person wakes up and already looks for a reason to worry, finishes a task and already thinks about the next one, solves a problem and already imagines another. When everything is calm, they feel strangeness, as if calm were only the interval before something bad. This is one of the most tiring parts of anxiety. It does not need big events to appear. It can feed on small details. A phrase, a memory, a commitment, a piece of news, a bodily sensation, a pending task. The anxious brain is excellent at finding material. But the fact that it is a habit also brings good news. Habits can be trained. Not with a magical change, but with repetition. The mind can learn new responses. The body can learn to recognize safety. The person can practice pauses, question thoughts, reduce avoidance, organize routines, sleep better, breathe with more awareness, limit excess stimuli, and seek help when necessary. It is not about stopping being anxious from one day to the next. It is about teaching the brain many times that it does not need to live as if every corner hit a threat. Little by little, the old trail loses strength and new paths begin to appear. The eighth fact is that anxiety often gets worse when we try to hide it. There's a layer of suffering that does not come from anxiety itself, but from the shame of being anxious. The person does not only feel fear. They criticize themselves for feeling fear. They do not only become nervous. They call themselves weak for being nervous. They do not only have difficulty. They think they should be different, stronger, more controlled, more normal. This second layer weighs a lot, because now the person is anxious for being anxious. They begin to monitor their own behavior. Do they notice? Am I strange? Did my voice change? Will they judge me? And this vigilance increases the symptoms. The more someone tries to seem absolutely calm, the more tension they accumulate. It is like trying to hold a ball underwater. You can do it for a while, but it requires constant strength. And the more strength, the more fear of losing control. In many cases, recognizing anxiety with honesty takes away part of its power. Not in the sense of announcing to everyone what you are feeling, but of stopping fighting internally with your own experience. There is an enormous difference between saying, I cannot feel this, and saying, this is uncomfortable, but I can go through it. The first phrase creates war. The second creates space. And anxiety usually intensifies when it finds internal war. Many people around also feel anxiety, even if it does not seem so. Some disguise it with productivity, others with humor, others with silence, others with control, others with irritation. The fact that someone seems safe does not mean that they do not have internal battles. Sometimes, anxiety is invisible precisely because many people learn to hide it well. The ninth fact is that anxiety can steal the present even when nothing is happening. This may be one of the most silent effects. The person is with friends, but thinking about tomorrow's problem. They are resting, but guilty for not being producing. They are receiving good news, but already imagining how it can go wrong. They are living a peaceful moment, but cannot inhabit that moment completely. Anxiety hijacks attention. It pulls the mind forward, backward, to possibilities, regrets, risks, and pending things. And since attention is an essential part of experience, when anxiety dominates attention, it changes the way life is felt. Simple things lose flavor. Conversations become distant. Rest seems impossible. Even good moments can come accompanied by tension. That is why many anxious people do not suffer only with intense crises. They suffer with the sensation of never switching off. The body is present, but the mind is somewhere else. And life keeps passing with the person always trying to reach a point where they will finally be able to relax. After I solve this, I will be at peace. But then another thing appears, and another, and another. Anxiety promises rest in the future, but charges presence in the present. It says, think a little more, control a little more, worry a little more, and then you will be safe. Only that this contract is rarely fulfilled. The anxious mind always finds a new clause. Recovering the present does not mean ignoring problems. It means returning to now more frequently, noticing the breath, noticing the environment, doing one thing at a time, truly listening to a conversation, feeling the body seated, naming what is happening. My mind is trying to predict danger. This simple recognition already changes the relationship with anxiety. You stop being completely inside the movie and begin to realize that you are watching a mental projection. The 10th fact is that anxiety does not define who you are. It can influence thoughts, sensations, and behaviors, but it is not your entire identity. An anxious person is not only anxiety. They have history, desires, intelligence, affection, humor, capacity, dreams, contradictions, talents, and possibilities. Only that anxiety, when it becomes very present, tries to occupy the center of everything. It makes the person believe that it will always be like this, that they cannot change, that they are incapable, that they are behind, that everyone deals with life better. But anxiety is an experience, not a sentence. It can be understood. It can be managed. It can decrease. It can be treated with adequate support when necessary. And, mainly, it can be observed without the person needing to believe everything it says. Imagine anxiety as an exaggeratedly fearful advisor inside the mind. He is not necessarily bad. He wants to avoid pain, rejection, failure, loss, and danger. But he sees threat in excess. If you let this advisor drive your life, he will always choose the safest path in the short term, even if that path makes your life smaller in the long term. He will avoid risks, conversations, attempts, changes, and vulnerability. Not because he hates you, but because he is afraid of everything. The question is not to destroy this advisor. The question is not to hand the steering wheel to him all the time. You can listen to him, thank him for the alert, and still choose with more awareness. You can say, I understood that you were trying to protect me, but I do not need to obey this fear now. Perhaps anxiety will never disappear completely, because some level of it is part of human life. But it does not need to command everything. It does not need to decide all your steps. It does not need to transform each doubt into a prison. The difference begins when you realize that feeling anxiety does not mean being in danger. Thinking something does not mean that it is true, and being afraid does not mean that you are incapable. In the end, one of the greatest surprises about anxiety is that it often seems like an enemy, but begins as a dysregulated protection. It tries to avoid suffering, but can end up creating suffering. It tries to prepare you for the future, but can steal the present. It tries to prevent mistakes, but can prevent experiences. It tries to keep you safe, but can make the world seem smaller than it really is. And perhaps the most important question is not, how do I make myself never feel anxiety again? Perhaps the question is, what life do I want to build, even when anxiety appears? Because waiting for fear to disappear completely to begin living can be a trap. Sometimes, life begins precisely when you take a small step, still with fear, and discover that you did not need to be totally ready to continue. If this video helped you understand anxiety in a clearer way, leave the like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who also needs to hear this. And now, I want to know, which of these 10 facts made the most sense to you or described something that you have already felt? Answer here in the comments, because your experience can help other people realize that they are not alone.